Alrighty, this is a 2004 R6 and it was wrecked. So the engine has a hole in it. If you've watched my other videos, you know that. So we're actually going to try and get the engine out today and replace the cylinder head on it. Now, this is going to be about taking the engine out. So what you have to do is first you have to get your gas tank off. It's very simple. The hardest part is draining the gas. You have a bolt right here and you've got these two screws up here. Once that's out of the way, you just disconnect your bottom green fuel line and your bottom white fuel line. Now, as you can see, I've labeled these. If you're going to do a job like this, you want plastic bags and you want a Sharpie because it's going to be really hard to tell where everything is when it's scattered all over like God's creation. So what you're going to want to do next is you've seen we've disconnected the airbox. So you've got two vacuum lines right here and you've got various wires in the way. What we're going to do next is we're going to get this sensor off. We're going to take these screws out of the fuel rail. As you can see, we've started, and we're going to pry this fuel rail off and get it away from the top end. Once that's done, you want to go ahead and disconnect your radiator hoses like you've seen I've already done, because you're not going to be able to take the engine out if it's connected to the radiator. So we've taken our big hose, we've got our small hose right here, we've got another hose on the side, which we're going to do. We've already drained all the fluid. You want to disconnect your clutch cable. Let's see, what else do we need to do? Basically anything that's connected to the engine, it needs to go. So this hose right here, we've got to drain that one in a second. You got to get your throttle cables up here. We'll disconnect those in a second. You can see we've taken our chain off and moved it out of the way. We're going to get our kickstand off in a second here. You've got wires that go from the kickstand to the frame and into the stator and the wiring harness. You want to remove those, and you want to disconnect your shift lever. Once all that's done, we'll work on getting the motor mounts out and dropping the engine. Stay tuned. Alrighty, so you can see these four little tabs right here. They go in underneath the fuel rail. We'll move one of these to the side so you can see that is the electrical connection for the injector. So if you look up in there, you'll see that there's a little orange body in there and it's connected to the fuel rail. There's four of them. You got to disconnect all of these. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. We went ahead and disconnected our atmospheric pressure sensor. Or the air temperature sensor. I can't remember which one it does. It's not really important. So we'll get those out of the way, and now we got to get to the bolts that hold the fuel rail in place. So at this point, you should stop, make sure that everything's labeled, take pictures where you need to, and get ready for one of the harder parts. All right, so now we're doing the final stages of loosening up this radiator. We've got all our hoses coming off. As you can see, once you start to disconnect other hoses, they're going to start. Oh, you got a leak over there.
Yeah, I got it.
Case in point, once you get the pressure off, it'll spill out. So once we've done this, we're going to go ahead and remove the radiator. We've got our bolt that comes up and it'll attach just underneath the headers right here, and you've got another bracket up here on top that we've already loosened. And you've got a little stud that it hangs off on this side right here. So once you get all that, this radiator will just kind of swoop out of the way, and you'll be able to easily get to all your wires up here. Now, what we've already done is we've taken off all of our coil wires for our coil packs. We're going to leave the coil packs in there until we get the engine out. This little puppy right here, this bracket is going to have to come off. That shares with the, I believe that's the horn right there. So we've gotten all these wires out of the way, and basically what we're going to do is just make sure that nothing is attached to the frame or the subframe, and we're going to drop the entire thing with the throttle body still on it if that's possible. It makes it easier to get the throttle bodies off, we think. There's a couple of bolts down here, they're hard to get to. So once you do that, stand by for further instructions. Alright, well, once you do that, your radiator will pop free and you'll expose the front of the block. So here's your cylinder head right here. You've got your exhaust on here to make everything much easier to get to. You can see we've labeled our radiator hoses. This is the intake for the right-hand side. This is the left-hand side. Or actually, I've switched those, and that's why we've labeled them. And this is your little overflow nipple right there. All these wires, this wiring harness should be able to pop free once we take this off. This is the coils. And I'm not entirely sure what that is. It's on top of the cylinder head. We'll figure that out later, but you just disconnect this wire, label it so that you can match them up later, and you'll be able to take this entire wiring harness, push it out to the side. What we want to do after that is The throttle cables right here are still attached to the throttle body, obviously, so we want to take those off. So we're going to come in behind here with a wrench and get those throttle cables off. And then we're going to be pretty close to being able to drop this thing. Okay, so you've got the bulk of all your wires right here. You got to remember to disconnect all your fuel lines and move them out of the way in the proper manner. There is an engine sensor down in here on the cylinder head that you have to get out right there, right next to my fourth finger right there, third finger, sorry. There's a couple of, need to have your idle screw out of the way. This is your kickstand sensor. It comes up from your kickstand. It goes into the engine right here. I disconnected all of them, just makes life easier. Like I said, you want to disconnect your stator and actually probably pull that through to make life a little bit easier, wouldn't it? Let's see what else. Most of our wires are out of the way. There is one more thing. You got to disconnect your starter right here. I believe that's what that is. Either way, it goes to the engine, so it's got to be disconnected. There's this little wire right here, and then these two hoses right in here. All right, so all of our... Oh, there's actually not much holding that on, huh? So all of our wires we've disconnected. We pulled our entire wiring harness out of the way. Everything that goes into this engine has been disconnected, labeled, and pulled aside. So the only thing that's not disconnected are the things that are looped from the engine back into the engine. The only thing holding the engine up at this point are the motor mounts. So let me go over a few things you might miss. Number one, you want to disconnect your shift lever because that's going to suck if it's hanging up on that, and that'd just be bad. You want to get your idle, your throttle idle pulley, idle cable out of the way. Your stator cover connection is going to loop back up into here. You need to disconnect it and pull it down so that, again, it doesn't tear something coming out of here. These two lines on the evap canister right back here, you need to disconnect those up here. We disconnected ours on the fuel rail since we're ripping the entire thing out, and then the other one we disconnected up in here, right there like that. You want to go ahead and disconnect your battery. We disconnected the ground. There's a ground wire down in there where you can see right above my middle finger right there. We disconnected that, pulled it out to the side. There's a wire on your oil pump pickup cover right here. We pulled that out of the way, disconnected it. Anything that you have, so I have a little charger which is no longer on the bike, but this would have been the wire for it. We disconnected that and pulled it out of the way. So, you want all your radiator hoses, everything that's, like that out of the way. Pulled that out of the way. Your exhaust headers need to be moved and pulled out of the way, so we removed all the exhaust headers. Let's see, what else? Your oil cooler that goes into the radiator, that needs to be pulled out of the way as well. So all this is ready. Oh, these two are good ones you might miss. So this is, I actually don't know what that does. It might be an oil pump for the top of the valve cover. And this is some sort of maybe an oil temperature sensor or something of that nature. Again, these need to be unplugged and pulled out of the way. So with all that said and done, this bike is pretty much ready to drop the engine out of now. Alrighty, so the engine is out of the bike. We have everything disconnected again. Can't stress enough, you need to label everything. So basically the way you drop them out is you just get a normal jack. We went ahead and put our engine on an engine stand. We'll get into engine stand in a minute because you can't use just any engine stand, but you just use a normal jack. You jack it up, you take your last bolt out, and it helps to have more than one person as you're doing this. But you just have one person on each side, one person with the jack and the other person steadying the engine as it comes down. We used a big plywood sheet, so the jack is underneath the plywood sheet, and the sheet, takes up all the space underneath the engine. And you just gradually let it down. You put a ratchet strap. Once the top end has kind of cleared the frame, put a ratchet strap around the engine and on top of that jack, and you just let it down all the way down, and then you just wheel it over to your engine stand, and you can use an engine lift, an engine hoist, which is what we did, but you could also use a jack. What you do is you just get it on top of a couple of cinder blocks, and you have, again, it's not hard to move these with two people. So you can, then move it from the ground to the jack, and you can jack it up enough to put it onto here. But that's all for today about how to remove an R6 engine. Thank you very much for watching. Good luck to you. Please leave a like and comment if you found this video enjoyable. Thank you very much. Have a good one.